The Prohibition era stands as a pivotal moment in American history, a tumultuous era that reshaped the nation's social fabric and continues to influence its politics today. It was a time when the allure of bootlegged liquor and underground jazz clubs collided with the harsh realities of organized crime and widespread corruption. As we delve into this fascinating chapter, get ready to uncover the hidden stories and forgotten heroes that will leave you wondering, what happens when a nation tries to outlaw its own desires? In the late 19th century, a perfect storm of social, economic, and cultural factors converged to lay the groundwork for the Prohibition era. The United States was undergoing rapid industrialization, with millions of immigrants flocking to urban centers in search of work. Cities like New York, Chicago, and San Francisco were transforming into bustling metropolises, with saloons and taverns sprouting up to cater to the needs of the working class. These establishments often served as community hubs, offering a space for people to gather, socialize, and escape the hardships of daily life. As the temperance movement gained momentum, organizations like the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League began to mobilize public opinion against the perceived evils of alcohol. The WCTU, founded in 1874, advocated for total abstinence from alcohol, while the ASL, established in 1893, focused specifically on closing saloons and prohibiting the sale of intoxicating liquors. These groups drew support from a wide range of Americans, including progressive reformers, religious leaders, and concerned citizens who believed that alcohol was a root cause of social problems like poverty, crime, and domestic violence. One of the key figures in the temperance movement was Frances Willard, a charismatic leader who served as president of the WCTU from 1879 until her death in 1898. Willard was a skilled orator and strategist who helped to galvanize public support for Prohibition, using slogans like "Do everything" to encourage her followers to take action on multiple fronts. Under her leadership, the WCTU expanded its membership and influence, becoming a major force in American politics. As the movement gained steam, state and local governments began to take notice. In 1881, Kansas became the first state to adopt a constitutional amendment prohibiting the manufacture and sale of intoxicating liquors. Other states, including Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, soon followed suit, implementing their own prohibition laws. These early experiments with prohibition provided valuable lessons for advocates, who refined their tactics and built momentum for a national campaign. The ASL, led by figures like Wayne Wheeler and Ernest Charrington, played a crucial role in coordinating the push for national prohibition. Founded in 1893, the ASL focused on lobbying state and federal lawmakers to support anti-saloon legislation. The organization's leaders were masterful politicians who built alliances with other reform groups, including the WCTU, and leveraged their collective influence to shape public policy. In 1913, the ASL launched a major campaign to secure a constitutional amendment prohibiting the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors. The proposed amendment, which would eventually become the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, was crafted by the ASL's leadership team, who worked tirelessly to build support among lawmakers and the general public. As the campaign gained momentum, the nation was poised on the brink of a major transformation, one that would have far-reaching consequences for American society, politics, and culture. The years leading up to World War I saw a significant escalation in the Prohibition campaign, with advocates like Billy Sunday, a former baseball player turned evangelist, crisscrossing the country to preach the gospel of temperance. Sunday's revival meetings, which often featured dramatic performances and passionate oratory, helped to whip up public enthusiasm for Prohibition, drawing in thousands of converts and galvanizing support for the cause. As the United States entered World War I, the Prohibition movement seized on the opportunity to link its cause with the war effort. Advocates argued that prohibiting alcohol would help to conserve grain, reduce industrial absenteeism, and promote national efficiency. This strategic maneuvering helped to build a broader coalition of support, as politicians and business leaders began to see prohibition as a patriotic duty. In 1917, Congress passed the Food and Fuel Control Act, which granted the president authority to regulate the production and distribution of food and fuel, including alcoholic beverages. This legislation marked a significant turning point in the Prohibition campaign, as it effectively gave the federal government the power to restrict the sale of liquor for the duration of the war. The following year, in 1918, the 18th Amendment was ratified by the necessary 3/4 of the states, paving the way for national prohibition. The amendment, which would go into effect on January 17, 1920, prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors, ushering in a new era of American history that would be marked by bootlegging, gang violence, and widespread social upheaval. As the 18th Amendment took effect on January 17, 1920, the United States embarked on a grand experiment in social engineering with far-reaching consequences for American society, politics, and culture. The Volstead Act, passed on October 28, 1919, provided the necessary framework for enforcing the amendment, defining intoxicating liquors as beverages containing more than 0.5% alcohol by volume. This strict definition meant that even seemingly innocuous drinks like beer and wine were now subject to prohibition, leaving many Americans wondering how they would adapt to this new reality. In the early days of Prohibition, the federal government faced significant challenges in enforcing the law. The Prohibition Bureau, established within the Treasury Department, was tasked with policing the nation's borders, intercepting smuggled liquor, and raiding speakeasies. However, the Bureau was woefully understaffed and underfunded, with only 1,500 agents to cover the entire country. This meant that many areas, particularly rural regions, were left largely unpatrolled, creating opportunities for bootleggers and moonshiners to operate with relative impunity. One of the most notorious bootleggers of the era was George Remus, a German-American lawyer turned liquor entrepreneur. Remus had made a fortune during World War I by producing medicinal whiskey, which was exempt from wartime restrictions. As Prohibition took hold, he saw an opportunity to capitalize on the demand for illicit liquor and began smuggling Canadian whiskey into the United States. Remus's operation was remarkably sophisticated, involving a network of corrupt officials, bribed customs agents, and clandestine warehouses. At the height of his power, Remus was estimated to be earning over $5 million per year, a staggering sum equivalent to over $70 million today. As the Prohibition regime struggled to contain the likes of Remus, urban areas like New York City and Chicago became hotbeds of organized crime. Gangsters like Arnold Rothstein and Al Capone saw the potential for enormous profits in the illicit liquor trade and began to build vast empires based on bootlegging, extortion, and violence. The infamous Five Points Gang in Manhattan, led by Paul Kelly, controlled a significant portion of the city's speakeasy trade, using intimidation and bribery to maintain their grip on the lucrative market. In response to the growing chaos, law enforcement agencies began to develop new tactics and technologies to combat bootlegging. The Prohibition Bureau invested heavily in wiretapping and surveillance equipment, allowing agents to gather intelligence on suspected bootleggers and track their movements. Additionally, the Bureau established a network of informants and undercover agents who infiltrated speakeasies and gathered evidence against high-ranking gang members. One notable example was the work of Agent Izzy Einstein, who went undercover in New York City's Lower East Side and gathered crucial evidence against several major bootlegging operations. Despite these efforts, the Prohibition regime continued to face significant challenges, including widespread corruption within its own ranks. Many Prohibition Bureau agents were either bribed or coerced into turning a blind eye to bootlegging activities, allowing gangsters like Remus and Capone to operate with relative ease. This corruption was exacerbated by the fact that many politicians, including some of the most prominent supporters of Prohibition, had secret ties to the liquor industry or were themselves involved in bootlegging operations. As the months passed, the situation continued to deteriorate, with violent clashes between rival gangs and law enforcement agencies becoming increasingly common. The streets of Chicago, in particular, became a battleground, as Al Capone's organization vied for control of the city's lucrative liquor trade against rivals like Bugs Moran and Jaime Weiss. The infamous gang war that ensued would claim dozens of lives, including those of several high-ranking gang members, and cement Capone's reputation as one of the most notorious figures in American crime history. As the gang war raged on, Al Capone's empire continued to expand, with his organization controlling a significant portion of the illicit liquor trade in Chicago. However, his reign was not without challenges, and in 1931 he was indicted on charges of income tax evasion. The trial, which began in October of that year, was highly publicized, with Capone's lawyers arguing that he had not filed tax returns because he did not consider himself a resident of the United States. Despite his defense team's efforts, Capone was found guilty on October 24, 1931, and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. Meanwhile, the Prohibition Bureau continued to face criticism for its handling of the Prohibition regime. In 1930, the Wickersham Commission, established by President Herbert Hoover to investigate the effectiveness of Prohibition, released a scathing report detailing widespread corruption and abuse within the Bureau. The report led to a significant overhaul of the organization, with many high-ranking officials being replaced or reassigned. As the country struggled to come to terms with the failures of Prohibition, a growing movement began to emerge calling for its repeal. In 1932, the Democratic Party platform included a plank calling for the repeal of the 18th Amendment, and presidential candidate Franklin D. Roosevelt campaigned on a promise to end Prohibition. After his election in November 1932, Roosevelt began to take steps to dismantle the Prohibition regime, including appointing a new commissioner to head the Prohibition Bureau and introducing legislation to modify the Volstead Act. One of the key figures in the repeal movement was Pauline Morton Sabin, a wealthy socialite and former supporter of Prohibition who had become disillusioned with its failures. In 1930, she founded the Women's Organization for National Prohibition Reform, which quickly gained momentum and became one of the leading voices calling for repeal. Sabin's organization worked tirelessly to lobby lawmakers and educate the public about the negative consequences of Prohibition, and her efforts played a significant role in shifting public opinion on the issue. On February 20, 1933, Congress passed the 21st Amendment, which repealed the 18th Amendment and effectively ended Prohibition. The amendment was ratified by the necessary number of states on December 5, 1933, and at 12:01 a.m. on that day, the sale of liquor became legal once again in the United States. The end of Prohibition marked a significant shift in American culture and society, as people began to return to their pre-Prohibition habits and the country slowly began to rebuild its liquor industry. In the aftermath of repeal, many of the gangsters who had made fortunes during the Prohibition era struggled to adapt to the new landscape. Al Capone, who had been released from prison in 1939 due to ill health, attempted to revive his empire but was ultimately unsuccessful. He died on January 25, 1947, at the age of 48, a shadow of his former self. Other notable figures, such as George Remus and Arnold Rothstein, also struggled to find their place in the post-Prohibition world, with Remus dying in 1952 and Rothstein being murdered in 1928. As the country looked back on the Prohibition era, it was clear that the experiment had been a failure. The rise of organized crime, the widespread corruption, and the negative impact on American society had all taken their toll. However, the legacy of Prohibition continued to shape American culture and policy, with many of the laws and regulations put in place during that era remaining on the books today. The Prohibition era stands as a profound reminder of the complexities and challenges of shaping a nation's moral fabric through legislation. The tumultuous years of bootlegging, gang warfare, and widespread corruption ultimately gave way to a hard-won lesson that the attempt to impose absolute morality through law can have far-reaching and devastating consequences. The Prohibition era may be a relic of history, but its impact remains a powerful cautionary tale, one that echoes through the ages, reminding us that the true test of a nation's character lies not in its ability to impose its will, but in its capacity for self-reflection, growth, and evolution. Thank you for joining me throughout this historical journey. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, remember that, to understand the present, we must first understand the past.